As I'm sure you all know, humans have unfortunately been responsible for the extinction of quite a few species in the past. We're also responsible in many cases for the extremely low populations of various endangered animals that are still clinging on to existence today. However, despite these saddening facts, there are also many humans determined to amend our harmful actions and to bring back the organisms that have had to suffer because of us. Conservation organisations, with the help of different governments across the world, have in many cases managed to save endangered species from extinction, a truly phenomenal deed for anyone to accomplish. So, with the aim to spread the word of remarkable conservation success stories, here are 5 animals that have been saved from extinction by humans. It's sad to think that the iconic humpback whale was at one point under a very real threat of extinction. These wonderful creatures are favourites amongst whale watchers due to their naturally curious and friendly nature, with individuals often coming very close to boats or even swimming underneath them as they investigate. They're also quite energetic whales, performing all sorts of behaviours such as tail and pectoral slapping, as well as being the whale that breaches the most frequently. However, in the past these animals were very nearly completely killed off. Commercial whaling in the 19th and early 20th centuries absolutely devastated this species, with an estimation of well over 100,000 whales being killed in this time. This brought down the population of the humpback whale by more than 90%, and fewer than 5,000 individuals remained across the entire world at one point. Certain regional populations were also numbering as low as fewer than 200. The humpback population before the whaling period occurred was likely in the realm of 125,000, and today the global population numbers at about 80,000. Although clearly much lower than before, this is also a massive improvement on the low of 5,000 individuals. So what was responsible for the remarkable recovery of this animal? In 1946, the International Whaling Commission was established, which aimed to regulate the whaling industry in order to stop any whale species going extinct. The IWC completely banned commercial hunting of humpback whales in 1966, but at this point they had already reached their all-time low of 5,000 individuals. Fortunately, thanks to this protection, their numbers have since recovered greatly, and today most of the different populations have actually been reclassified from vulnerable to least concern. Despite the impressive rebound of this species though, there are still not nearly as many humpbacks as there were before the whaling era, and there is likely still a long period of recovery before the current numbers can reach that high again. Nevertheless, it is a success story of a species that humans have managed to bring back from the edge of extinction. These small primates are native to Brazil, inhabiting rainforests along the Atlantic coast near Rio de Janeiro. Unfortunately, the rainforest they live in has been severely reduced over time, and today only about 5% of it actually remains. The golden lion tamarins are restricted to about 4 small regions within this rainforest, with around a third of the wild population actually being descendants of captive-born, reintroduced individuals. There are approximately just over 1,000 golden lion tamarins currently alive in the wild, according to most estimates, and although this is pretty low, it's a huge improvement to their situation only a few decades ago, and shows that there is some hope for this species. These creatures used to inhabit large areas across the coastal rainforests, and they were actually quite numerous for a long time. But then, massive regions of their habitat were cleared away in order to make room for sugar plantations, as well as space for more farms. This severe loss of habitat was almost the end for the golden lion tamarin. Estimates indicate that in the year 1969, the tamarin's numbers had dropped to an all-time low of between 200 to 300 individuals, with some evaluations suggesting an even lower drop to only 150 individuals. Therefore, considering that there are now over 1,000 of these animals living in the wild, there has clearly been a fairly successful conservation effort. It started in 1982 when the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, officially listed the golden lion tamarin as an endangered animal. The following year, the National Zoo of the United States, along with the WWF, then initiated a program to save these animals with the help of 140 zoos across the world. Working with the Brazilian government, 2 protected wildlife reserves were designated as areas where tamarins could be reintroduced from captive bred populations. This would give a boost to the numbers of animals living in the wild, and also increase their genetic diversity, further securing the chance of success. Zoos started to breed golden lion tamarins, before several small groups were reintroduced to different areas over the course of a few years. There were also projects to translocate populations of tamarins, taking them from isolated areas of rainforest and bringing them to the protected protected reserves. These conservation efforts were successful for a while, but unfortunately, between about 1997 and 2001, the population began to fall again, as there were problems with predators killing off quite a few of the tamarins. This caused the tamarins to be relisted as critically endangered, but thankfully it now seems as though these animals' population is more stable, and they were defined as endangered instead of critically endangered back in 2003. The increase from about 200 to over 1,000 tamarins in just 30 or so years is quite an achievement, and really does provide a sense of hope for these animals, but in the end they are still endangered. According to the WWF, the golden lion tamarin must double its current population in order to be taken off the list of endangered animals, so clearly they still need our help. This conservation story is, however, an example of the good that zoos can do. With their help, this species was able to come back from the verge of disappearing forever. If you would like to show your much needed support for this animal, you can donate to the conservation organisation that is working to save the species. I'll leave a link in the description to savetheliontamarin.org where you can learn more. The bald eagle, although it is the national animal of the United States and a truly iconic creature, was at one point sadly under serious threat of extinction. This sea eagle's original range once stretched across most of North America, inhabiting the majority of Canada, all of the US other than Hawaii, and down into parts of Mexico. Unfortunately, these animals were greatly reduced in numbers mainly throughout the 20th century, falling from a population of between 300,000 and 500,000 in the early 1700s to a grim 417 nesting pairs by the year 1963. The cause of this drastic diminishing was due to human activities. Starting with the loss of their habitats when forests were cleared away, many other factors have also contributed to the near extinction of the bald eagle. The pollution of the waterways they were using, along with the contamination with poisons of the animals they fed on, were aspects that caused a great deal of harm, and the reduction of their prey due to overhunting was also a serious problem. A great many bald eagles were also shot, as they were believed to have posed a threat to livestock such as lambs. People feared that the eagles would carry away the lambs, and apparently also claimed that they could carry off human children. In the year 1930, it was estimated that around 70,000 bald eagles had been shot during the past 12 years in Alaska alone, showing how hunting was probably the most damaging factor leading to this species' massive decline. Another factor that has been blamed is the use of the pesticide DDT. Studies indicated that this substance was built up through the trophic levels, where these eagles were at the top, and the accumulation in adult birds prevented them from laying normal eggs. Instead, the studies found that their eggs had very thin shells, making them weaker than healthy eggs and therefore very likely to break under the weight of the brooding parent. As the bald eagle population continued to drop lower and lower, culminating in the approximately 417 nesting pairs in 1963, various protection laws were brought into effect to try and avoid the complete loss of the species. One of the first laws that was established in the US was the 1940 Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, which outlawed the killing or trapping of the animals for commercial purposes. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1972 between the US and Mexico further defended the animals and the resources they needed, and in 1967 they had been added to a list of endangered species in the Endangered Species Preservation Act. A year after the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, in 1973, bald eagles were also included in a list of threatened and endangered animal species in the Endangered Species Act, which offered even more protection to their habitats and nesting areas. In 1972, DDT was also banned from being used in the US, and the end of its application is thought to correlate with the recovering numbers of bald eagles. Since the 70s, the bald eagle population has certainly increased, and in 1995 none of the eagle populations in the lower 48 states were listed as endangered anymore. Even better than that though is that in 2007 the bald eagle had recovered so well that it was taken off the list of threatened and endangered species, and now they don't even require safeguarding from the Endangered Species Act. This animal's recovery is something that I've also actually experienced firsthand, as we encountered quite a few around Vancouver Island when we visited the area in 2015, and they definitely did not seem uncommon back then. It's another remarkable conservation success story, and certainly something for humans to be proud of. Since we've sadly recently seen the passing of the last male northern white rhino, I thought it would be encouraging to talk about a rhino species that actually shows the promise of being able to recover from a near extinction. The greater one-horned rhinoceros, which is also known as the Indian rhinoceros, is the largest of the 3 Asian species of rhino, and can grow up to quite impressive sizes. The largest males can reach lengths of between 3.7 and 3.8 meters, and stand about 1.8 meters tall at the shoulder, making this creature the second biggest animal native to Asia, after the Asian elephant. These mainly solitary animals are grazers, feeding on grasses as well as leaves and fruit. They are easily recognised thanks to the single large black horn on their heads, which usually grow to lengths of about 25 centimeters, but can get bigger. They also possess characteristic skin folds that give their skin the unique appearance of having some sort of armour plating. The greater one-horned rhinos were enormously reduced in numbers and range before the 20th century, and whereas they had at one time inhabited much of India, with their population stretching from Pakistan to Myanmar, by the start of the 20th century there were only about 200 Indian rhinos left, and they now inhabited tiny parts of India and Nepal. This massive decline was primarily the result of hunting the animals for their horns, which were used in traditional medicines and thought to possess curative powers. Another severely damaging factor in this animal's decline was also the loss of their habitat, as it was cleared to make room for ever-growing agricultural practices, restricting the rhinos to areas not nearly large enough to maintain their highly territorial nature. Thankfully, throughout much of the later 20th and early 21st century, there has been a huge conservation effort to restore the greater one-horned rhinos' numbers and avoid their extinction. This creature has been listed as an endangered animal by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species ever since the year 1975, and the Indian and Nepalese governments have been crucial in developing ways in which to save the rhino. Working with the WWF as well, a translocation program was initiated during the 1980s, and various individuals were moved to different wildlife reserves within India, as well as being taken to Pakistan from Nepal. In Nepal itself, protected areas were also established where the rhinos could live and be kept from harm, and the ranges here and in India are known to be aggressive in their methods of deterring poachers. These conservation efforts have clearly paid off, and in 2008 the IUCN reclassified the greater one-horned rhino as vulnerable instead of endangered, as they reached numbers of around 2,575. Unfortunately, illegal poaching remains a major issue for this species, as their horns are still being used in traditional medicines, and the problem of a restricted range is putting limits on how much these rhinos can actually recover. The various wildlife reserves can only support so many individuals, and as they become filled up, rhinos are pushed into contact with humans around the parks, which has unfortunately led to some fatal interactions. However, today the Indian rhino's population is estimated at around 3,500, and hopefully this increase will continue well into the future. If you'd like to show your support for these creatures, donating to the WWF allows them to continue the work they are doing to protect the rhinos, as well as many other species. The kakapo is one of the most unique birds alive today, and features all sorts of fascinating quirks of anatomy, as well as being objectively adorable. These flightless parrots are native to New Zealand, and are also known by one of their alternate names of owl parrots, due to their nocturnal behaviour and superficial resemblance to owls. Adult kakapo are actually fairly sizable birds, generally achieving lengths of around 60 centimeters, and they are the heaviest of all currently living parrot species. Although they are flightless, ground-dwelling animals, they will climb trees and are known to jump from them, utilizing their short wings as a sort of parachute as they descend at a steep angle. Unfortunately, as charismatic as the kakapo may be, this did not help them in the past when they very nearly became extinct. There's evidence to suggest that these birds used to be a very common animal in the islands of New Zealand, and were present on both of the main land masses, but began to decline once the first humans arrived on the islands. With the arrival of the Maori, the kakapo soon started to fall in numbers, as they were an important source of food for the Maori people, and their skins were used to make clothing since they were extremely effective at insulating. It's thought that the clearing of various habitats and predation by the Maori's dogs were also responsible for the drop in the kakapo population, but probably the most devastating factor was the introduced Polynesian rats hunting young individuals. When the first Europeans arrived in New Zealand, kakapos were still present in some areas of the North and South Islands, but were greatly reduced from their previous range. Kakapos only continued to drop in numbers after Europeans arrived, eventually completely dying out on the North Island in about 1930. The parrots managed to last a little longer in the South Island, but finally disappeared from there in the 1980s. Thankfully, it turned out that sightings of kakapos on Stewart Island, off the coast of the South Island, were very much based in truth, and a population of between 100 to 200 birds were found to be living here in 1977. Once the last kakapos from the mainland had become functionally extinct, it seemed that the Stewart Island population was the last hope for the species. However, they were under threat. This population was also decreasing in numbers as a result of cat predation, and so cat control measures were taken in an attempt to let the kakapos recover. In later years, it was then decided that it would be best to translocate the remaining birds to islands free of cats and other threats, and so between 1980 and 1997, all the kakapos that could be found were transferred to safer islands. Despite these efforts though, the islands they were moved to still contained Polynesian rats, and in 1995 the kakapo reached their all-time low population of just 51 individuals. Thankfully, more intense conservation techniques have since managed to increase their numbers. Rats were eradicated from one of the islands they were on, and conservationists started to give food supplements to nesting females. The birds are now also intensively monitored using infrared cameras and proximity sensors, and these new methods have seen an increase in the number of kakapo now being born. Today, the population of the kakapo is between 150 and 160 individuals, and seems to be increasing thanks to the work of organisations such as the Kakapo Recovery Programme. Although this is still a critically endangered animal, their numbers are up from the low in 1995, and hopefully with the help of humans, will continue to grow even more in the years to come. So there are 5 animals that have been saved from extinction by humans. Although in all these cases it was the actions of humanity that brought them to near extinction in the first place, without the help of conservationists and governments around the world, they would never have had the chance to come back from the brink. I hope that recoveries like these can one day happen in all endangered species, and perhaps this video has encouraged you to want to help the restoration of such creatures by donating to conservation organisations, or even just by spreading the word and showing people that it is in fact possible to bring these animals back if only we act quickly enough. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you would like to learn more about our world, its history, and the wonderful life that surrounds us all, please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you think we deserve it, and if you would like to see more from us.